They mocked her. They dismissed her. To them, she was invisible, just a cleaning lady quietly scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins. But what they didn't know was that she was the owner of the very company they worked for, silently observing their every move. Her disguise wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated decision to uncover the truth. And when she revealed who she really was, their lives and the company would never be the same. Before we dive into this gripping story of Elena Morales, her courage, and her remarkable leadership transformation, drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from today. And if you love stories about resilience, leadership, and unexpected twists, don't forget to hit subscribe. This is one tale you won't want to miss. The hum of conversation filled the boardroom as employees moved about, oblivious to the quiet figure pushing a mop across the pristine floors. Elena Morales, dressed in her janitor's uniform, worked with slow, deliberate movements. Her outward calmness masked the rapid thoughts racing through her mind. Her position as a cleaning lady was no accident. Elena wasn't just any janitor. She was the woman who owned the building and the company operating within it. As the newly appointed CEO, she had chosen to bury her title temporarily to uncover the truth about the issues plaguing her recent acquisition. From her vantage point in the room's corner, Elena silently observed the group of executives huddled near the table. They were engaged in heated discussions about cost-cutting strategies, each man speaking over the other. Most were completely unaware of her presence. Their discussions lacked empathy or foresight. They spoke about layoffs, slashing employee benefits, and restructuring entire departments without concern for the human lives impacted by their decisions. To them, it was merely a numbers game. Elena tightened her grip on the mop handle as her heart sank. The corporation had once been a tech industry leader, a powerhouse brimming with innovation and creativity. But years of mismanagement and ego-driven decisions had driven it to the brink of collapse. Elena had seen these patterns before, leaders sacrificing long-term stability for short-term gains, and she was determined to end the cycle. But what struck Elena most as she studied the company wasn't the financial losses or declining market share. It was the complete disregard for the employees, whose hard work had been the foundation of the company's former success. Bookmark. Elena's decision to step into the role of a janitor hadn't come lightly. Her journey had been shaped by her upbringing in a family with limited resources. She had worked her way up from the bottom, often overlooked or underestimated because of her gender and background. The resilience and humility she had cultivated over the years became her greatest strengths. Now, as she took on this disguised role, she relied on those qualities to remain composed amidst the casual disrespect she faced daily. It had been 2 weeks since Elena donned the uniform and began pushing the mop. Each day had tested her patience. She'd encountered dismissive attitudes, snide remarks, and even outright racism. The minute she walked through the doors in her janitor's attire, she became invisible to the very people whose careers she held in her hands. But Elena wasn't here to react to petty insults. She had a mission. Her goal was to understand the company's problems, not just the ones written in spreadsheets, but the ones festering in its culture. As Elena wiped down a coffee stain on the floor, the voices in the room grew louder. Jacob Pearson, a tall, sharp-dressed man with an air of arrogance, leaned over the conference table. "We can't keep offering these benefits packages at this rate," he said, his voice firm and commanding. "If we cut 20% of the lower-level staff, it'll be enough to satisfy the board for another quarter," Jacob continued, his tone devoid of concern for the workers he planned to eliminate. Several heads nodded in agreement, their focus on the charts projected on the wall. Elena's chest tightened. She had seen this approach too many times before, leaders gutting their teams to save face, ignoring the long-term damage they inflicted on morale and productivity. Then came the comment that struck a nerve. Jacob turned toward Elena and let out a dismissive chuckle. "Honestly, these janitors," he muttered, just loud enough for the others to hear. "Why do we need so many of them? Half the time, they're just standing around." Elena's face remained neutral as she cleaned a nearby table. She had learned long ago not to let remarks like these rattle her outwardly, but inside, her resolve hardened. Later that day, Elena sat alone in the break room, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. Around her, small groups of employees chatted and laughed. None acknowledged her presence. Amanda Carter, one of the administrative assistants, leaned against the counter, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "That new janitor? What's her name again? Not that it matters. She's so quiet. I bet she doesn't even speak English." Laughter erupted from her colleagues, and Amanda smirked, glancing toward Elena without a hint of shame. Elena kept her eyes on her mug, her expression unreadable. She had endured countless moments like this in her life. The words didn't hurt her as much as the complacency of those around Amanda. No one spoke up to challenge the blatant prejudice. In moments like these, Elena felt the weight of her decision to go undercover. The disdain she encountered was exhausting, but it also confirmed her suspicions. The toxicity in the company wasn't just financial, it was cultural, embedded in the way people treated one another. That evening, as Elena finished her shift, she walked through the now quiet office halls. The building felt different at night. It was peaceful and almost serene. She stopped in front of the CEO's office, staring at the brass nameplate on the door. The nameplate still bore the name of the previous CEO. In just a few weeks, it would carry her own name. "When it does," Elena whispered to herself, "they'll never see it coming." She turned away, stepping into the cool night air. The crisp breeze offered a brief respite from the day's tension. As she walked to her car, her mind raced with thoughts of the coming storm. They wouldn't see it coming. But she was ready. She had always been ready. The next morning began like any other. Elena donned her uniform and entered the office as if she were invisible. But this time, the weight of her mission felt heavier than ever. She knew that the casual disdain and dismissiveness she faced daily were symptoms of a larger problem, a culture that valued titles over humanity. Her patience had been tested, her endurance stretched to its limits. But Elena had learned the art of patience long ago. True change didn't happen overnight. It required careful planning, observation, and most importantly, courage. With every step she took, Elena reminded herself of the people she was fighting for. Soon, the same individuals who dismissed her would have no choice but to recognize her authority, and when that day came, Elena vowed to reshape the company into a place where everyone was treated with respect, no matter their role. The morning sun streamed through the large glass windows of the office, casting long, golden streaks across the polished floors. Elena Morales maneuvered her cleaning cart through the bustling halls, her uniform a cloak of invisibility. Employees hurried past her without a glance, too engrossed in their own worlds to notice the woman who, unbeknownst to them, held their professional futures in her hands. As she pushed the cart into one of the conference rooms, she overheard a group of employees discussing the rumors of impending layoffs. The tension in their voices was unmistakable. "I heard they're planning to cut another 15% of the workforce," said Amanda Carter, the same administrative assistant who had mocked Elena in the break room. Her tone was tinged with worry, but laced with the same casual superiority she'd displayed before. "Probably half the janitors will be gone," Amanda continued with a shrug. "They're barely necessary as it is." Her words hung in the air, eliciting a few murmurs of agreement from the others. Elena bent down, pretending to focus on a scuff mark on the floor, her face carefully neutral. The disdain Amanda showed was nothing new, but it was a painful reminder of how easily some people devalued the contributions of others. As the group disbanded, Jacob Pearson, the ambitious mid-level manager who had become a recurring thorn in Elena's side, entered the room. He exuded the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance, his voice carrying across the room even before he spoke. "Honestly," Jacob said, dropping into one of the leather chairs and loosening his tie, "we don't need all these janitors. What do they even do all day? Sweep the floor and empty the trash? We could cut that staff in half and still get by just fine." His colleagues chuckled, some nodding in agreement. Elena kept her head down, her hands tightening on the mop handle. She had endured worse in her life, but the blatant disregard for the dignity of others never ceased to sting. Jacob's words echoed the attitudes she had encountered throughout her career, people who measured worth solely by job titles or perceived utility. It was a toxic mindset, one that had led to the decay of not just this company but countless others. By lunchtime, Elena found herself in the break room again, seated at the same small round table with her chipped mug of coffee. Around her, the room buzzed with chatter as employees discussed their weekend plans and gossiped about office politics. Tim Rogers, a young intern, stood by the coffee machine with a group of his peers. His voice carried over the hum of conversation as he launched into a tirade. "I don't get why they keep so many janitors around," Tim said, pouring cream into his coffee with exaggerated nonchalance. "I mean, how hard can it be to clean a building? They just push brooms and wipe desks, right?" Laughter erupted from the group, and Tim glanced over at Elena, his eyes flicking over her as if she were part of the furniture. "Seriously, look at her. Doesn't even talk to anyone. Bet she doesn't speak English." The laughter swelled, and Elena's chest tightened. She stared into her coffee, her face a mask of indifference. She had heard comments like this before, endured the same dehumanizing assumptions countless times in her life. But as much as she tried to let it roll off her back, the sting was still there. It wasn't just Tim's words that cut deep. It was the fact that no one in the room thought to challenge him. Later that afternoon, Elena's resolve was tested once again. Jacob, still riding the wave of his own perceived importance, called her over from across the room. "Hey you," he said, waving her toward his desk without looking up from his computer screen. Elena approached, her expression carefully blank. "The trash can's overflowing," Jacob said, gesturing dismissively toward the bin. Elena glanced at the trash can. It was less than half full. Without a word, she tied up the bag, replaced it with a new one, and turned to leave. "Unbelievable," Jacob muttered to a colleague as she walked away. "These people move like molasses, and they probably think they deserve a raise just for showing up." The words lingered in Elena's mind as she made her way back to her cart. She had seen the looks, heard the comments, felt the quiet judgment from people like Jacob her entire life. But she refused to let their ignorance define her. That evening, long after most of the employees had left the building, Elena stood alone in the office. The halls were quiet, the hum of activity replaced by a serene stillness. She found herself once again in front of the CEO's office, the brass nameplate glinting faintly in the dim light. In just a few weeks, her name would replace the one currently engraved on the plate. But for now, she remained the invisible observer, the silent witness to a culture that had strayed far from its ideals. Taking a deep breath, Elena turned and walked toward the exit. The night air was crisp and cool, a welcome contrast to the tension that had built up throughout the day. As she made her way to her car, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The company was rotting from the inside out, poisoned by a culture of arrogance, entitlement, and disdain. But Elena wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. She had built her career by facing adversity head-on, and this was no different. "They won't see it coming," she murmured to herself, her breath visible in the chilly night air. "But when the time comes, they'll understand." The next day began just like the others, with Elena slipping into her uniform and blending into the background of the office. But this time, the weight of her mission felt heavier. As she moved through the hallways, her eyes caught the nervous glances and whispered conversations of employees. Rumors of layoffs had spread like wildfire, leaving everyone on edge. Elena knew she couldn't wait much longer. The company was at a tipping point, and the decisions being made in the boardroom threatened to push it over the edge. But she also knew that change couldn't be rushed. It required patience, strategy, and a willingness to endure. And if there was one thing Elena had learned in her life, it was how to endure. With every insult, every dismissive glance, and every demeaning comment, Elena's resolve only grew stronger. Soon, the people who dismissed her would come to see her for who she truly was. And when that day came, she would be ready. The air in the office grew heavier with each passing day. Anxiety rippled through the workforce as whispers of layoffs reached even the most isolated corners of the building. For Elena Morales, the tension was a double-edged sword. She could feel the weight of the uncertainty around her, but it also solidified her determination to uncover every layer of dysfunction before revealing herself. Pushing her cleaning cart down the main corridor, she overheard fragments of conversations, rumors, fears, and frustration. It wasn't just about job security. The morale of the employees had been ground down by years of poor leadership, thoughtless policies, and a culture that prioritized numbers over people. Elena had read every financial report before buying the company. The figures painted a dire picture, but what the spreadsheets didn't reveal was the toxic environment within its walls. That was something she had to see and experience for herself. And over the past few weeks, the picture had become painfully clear. The break room was particularly lively that day, its usual air of idle chatter replaced with nervous energy. Elena stood near the sink, methodically wiping down the counters as she listened in on a conversation between Amanda Carter and her colleague. Amanda leaned against the counter, her arms crossed. "If they're really looking to save money, they should start with the janitors," she said, her voice loud enough to be heard across the room. Her colleague, a man Elena hadn't seen before, shrugged. "I heard they're already looking into outsourcing. It's cheaper to hire a cleaning service than keep all these people on payroll." "Exactly," Amanda said, smirking. "They probably wouldn't even notice if half of them disappeared tomorrow." Elena kept her head down, scrubbing at a stubborn coffee stain on the counter. The comments stung, not because they were new, but because they underscored a deeper issue, the complete lack of respect for the people who kept the company running behind the scenes. It wasn't just the janitors who bore the brunt of this indifference. Elena had seen how lower-level employees were treated across the board. Administrative staff, junior associates, and even interns were all expendable in the eyes of the higher-ups. In the afternoon, Elena found herself in the conference room again, cleaning up after a meeting. Jacob Pearson was still there, lingering with a few colleagues as they went over their latest cost-cutting proposals. "We'll start with the admin team," Jacob said, tapping a pen against the table. "We can cut at least 20% without affecting operations. Most of what they do can be automated or delegated." One of his colleagues hesitated. "What about morale? If we keep making cuts, people are going to start losing faith in the company." Jacob scoffed. "Morale doesn't pay the bills. Besides, they should be grateful they have jobs at all." Elena's hands clenched around the mop handle as she listened. It wasn't just the callousness of Jacob's words that angered her. It was the short-sightedness. A company couldn't thrive if its employees were demoralized and disengaged. But people like Jacob didn't see it that way. To them, workers were numbers on a spreadsheet, easily reduced or replaced. "Don't forget the janitors," Jacob added with a laugh. "We could cut half of them tomorrow, and no one would notice." Elena forced herself to remain calm, focusing on the motions of cleaning instead of the simmering anger in her chest. She had to remind herself that this was why she was here, not just to endure the ignorance, but to understand its roots so she could tear it out. As the day wore on, Elena encountered more of the same. In the hallway near the elevators, Tim Rogers, the young intern who had already made a poor impression, was chatting loudly with a group of his peers. "I don't even know half the people who work here," Tim said, his tone flippant. "Honestly, I don't see why we need so many staff. The janitors, for one, what do they even do all day? They're probably just milking the clock." One of his friends laughed. "Careful, Tim. They might hear you." "Let them," Tim said with a grin. "What are they going to do? Sweep me off my feet?" Elena happened to be walking by at that moment, and Tim's eyes flicked to her briefly before returning to his friends. "See what I mean? She's not even paying attention." Elena didn't respond. She had learned long ago that reacting to people like Tim only gave them power. Instead, she focused on her own power, the quiet, unwavering strength that came from knowing the truth. By the time Elena returned to her cleaning closet that evening, her shoulders ached from the physical labor and the emotional toll of the day. She sat on a stool, staring at the mop and bucket in front of her. She thought about the people she had met over the past few weeks, the ones who had dismissed her, disrespected her, and underestimated her. But she also thought about the employees she had seen quietly doing their jobs, working hard despite the lack of recognition or support. These were the people she was fighting for, the ones who made the company run, not because they were driven by greed or ambition, but because they believed in the value of their work. Elena knew she couldn't save everyone. Some people, like Jacob and Tim, were too entrenched in their arrogance to change. But for the others, the ones who deserved better, she would do everything in her power to create a workplace where they could thrive. The next morning, Elena entered the office with a renewed sense of purpose. The rumors of layoffs had reached a fever pitch, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, she overheard Amanda and another colleague discussing the upcoming board meeting. "They're meeting today to finalize the layoffs," Amanda said, her voice hushed but excited. "I heard they're cutting at least 20% across all departments." Elena felt her stomach tighten. The decisions being made in that boardroom would determine the future of the company and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. But she couldn't reveal herself yet. There was still more to observe, more to understand. She needed to know exactly what she was up against before she could act. For now, Elena remained the silent observer, blending into the background as the storm continued to build around her. But she knew that the tipping point was near, and when the time came, she would be ready to act. The tension in the office had reached a boiling point. Every conversation seemed laced with anxiety. Every glance between employees a mix of suspicion and worry. Elena Morales, still moving through the halls as an unnoticed janitor, could feel the weight of the unease pressing down on everyone. Her observations over the past few weeks had painted a clear picture. The problems within the company ran far deeper than financial losses. They were woven into the very fabric of the workplace culture, manifesting as disdain, arrogance, and a lack of basic respect for employees. Elena had come to the company expecting challenges, but the depth of the dysfunction was staggering. Yet instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt energized. This was exactly why she had taken on this mission. Bookmark, go back. Elena was no stranger to adversity. Her journey to becoming a CEO had been anything but smooth, filled with moments where she was underestimated, dismissed, or outright ignored. But she had learned early on that true change required more than just ambition. It required strategy. Over the next few days, she focused on mapping out her next steps. Every interaction, every overheard comment, every dismissive glance became part of the puzzle she was piecing together. She had spent weeks observing the company's problems from the bottom up, and now she was ready to start planning her moves. The upcoming board meeting would be pivotal. Elena knew the executives would make decisions that would have lasting consequences for the company and its employees. But she also knew that their solutions, layoffs, outsourcing, and benefit cuts would only deepen the company's problems. She couldn't let that happen. Despite her confidence, there were moments when doubt crept in. One evening, as she sat in the break room sipping coffee from her chipped mug, she couldn't help but wonder if her plan was too ambitious. Could she really change the culture of an entire corporation? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of laughter. At a nearby table, Amanda Carter and a few colleagues were sharing a joke at the expense of another employee. "Did you hear about Marcus from IT?" Amanda said, her voice dripping with mockery. "He thought he'd get promoted. Can you imagine? As if they'd ever put someone like him in charge of anything important." The others laughed, and Amanda leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the attention. Elena clenched her jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. It wasn't just Amanda's words that bothered her. It was the way no one questioned her behavior. The complacency was just as toxic as the cruelty. In that moment, Elena's doubt evaporated. She had seen enough. The company needed a leader who would stand up for the people who had been silenced and overlooked for far too long. And she was ready to be that leader. Patience had always been one of Elena's greatest strengths, but even she found it difficult to endure the daily humiliations that came with her disguise. One afternoon, she was called over by Jacob Pearson, who was once again sitting at his desk with an air of entitlement. "Hey, can you grab me some coffee?" he said, not bothering to look up from his computer. Elena paused for a moment, then nodded silently. She walked to the break room, filled a mug with coffee, and returned to Jacob's desk. "About time," Jacob muttered, taking the mug without a word of thanks. Elena walked away, her face unreadable. She reminded herself that moments like this were temporary. Soon, Jacob and others like him would understand the consequences of their actions. Not all of Elena's observations were discouraging. Among the sea of arrogance and apathy, she occasionally encountered glimmers of hope. employees who, despite the toxic environment, treated others with kindness and respect. One such employee was Marisol Vega, a young administrative assistant who worked tirelessly without complaint. One evening, Elena saw Marisol staying late to help a colleague prepare for a presentation. As Marisol packed up her things, she noticed Elena cleaning nearby and offered her a warm smile. "Thanks for keeping this place running," Marisol said, her tone sincere. Elena nodded, a small smile breaking through her usual composure. Moments like these reminded her why she was doing this. There were people worth fighting for, and Marisol was one of them. As the date of the board meeting approached, the tension in the office reached a fever pitch. Employees speculated about who would be laid off, which departments would be restructured, and whether their own jobs were safe. Elena knew the decisions made in that room would determine the fate of hundreds of employees. But she also knew that the executives that short-sighted plans would do more harm than good. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now it was time to act. The day before the meeting, Elena encountered Tim Rogers, the young intern who had become infamous for his thoughtless remarks. Tim was standing by the water cooler, loudly complaining about the janitorial staff. "I mean, how hard can it be to clean a building?" Tim said, rolling his eyes. "We could replace half of them with robots, and no one would notice." Elena walked past him without a word, but her mind was racing. Tim's comments were a perfect example of the arrogance and ignorance that had infected the company. But instead of letting the anger consume her, Elena channeled it into determination. Tomorrow, she would confront not just Tim, but the entire leadership team. That evening, Elena stood outside the building, staring up at its towering facade. She thought about the people inside, the employees who had been ignored, dismissed, and disrespected for far too long. She thought about the executives who had perpetuated the toxic culture, the ones who saw employees as nothing more than expendable assets. And she thought about the change she was about to bring. Elena took a deep breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for the challenge. "Tomorrow," she whispered to herself, "everything changes." With that, she turned and walked to her car, the faint glow of the city lights reflecting in her eyes. The boardroom was quiet, except for the low hum of nervous chatter. The sleek glass table was surrounded by the company's top executives, all of whom wore grim expressions as they prepared for the meeting that would determine the company's future. Elena Morales, dressed in her janitor's uniform, entered the room unnoticed, pushing her mop and bucket to the far corner. She had been cleaning this very room for weeks, silently observing the people who now sat at the table. Today, however, was different. The tension in the air was almost suffocating, as the executives braced themselves to make decisions they knew would affect hundreds of employees. At the head of the table stood Michael Hayes, the current CEO. His face was pale, his usual air of authority replaced by a nervous energy. "We're in trouble," Michael began, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Our projections for the next quarter are worse than anticipated. If we don't take drastic measures, the company won't survive." Bookmark. The executives launched into a heated discussion, each person vying to present their version of a solution. Unsurprisingly, their ideas followed the same pattern Elena had come to expect: layoffs, budget cuts, and outsourcing. Jacob Pearson, always quick to dominate the conversation, leaned forward in his chair. "We should start with the administrative staff," he said confidently. "We could reduce their numbers by at least 25%. That alone would save us enough to buy some time." Michael nodded thoughtfully, but before he could respond, Jacob continued. "And let's not forget the janitorial staff," Jacob added with a smirk. "We don't need nearly as many as we have now. Honestly, we could outsource the entire department for a fraction of the cost." Elena felt her stomach tighten. She had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud still filled her with anger. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They were people who had dedicated themselves to the company, often without recognition or fair compensation. As the discussion continued, Elena quietly set her mop aside. The moment she had been preparing for had finally arrived. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the head of the table, her steps steady and deliberate. "Excuse me," Elena said, her voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, a mix of confusion and irritation etched onto the faces of the executives. Michael Hayes frowned. "This is a private meeting," he said, his tone sharp. "You have no business being here." Elena met his gaze without flinching. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a small envelope and placed it on the table in front of him. "I think you'll find that I do," she said calmly. Michael hesitated, then picked up the envelope. As he read the contents, his face drained of color. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the papers back on the table. This can't be right," Michael stammered, looking up at Elena in disbelief. "Oh, it's very right," Elena replied, her voice steady and firm. "As of several weeks ago, I am the majority owner of this company, and today I'm here to make some changes." The room erupted into chaos. The executives began speaking over one another, their voices a cacophony of shock, confusion, and anger. Jacob Pearson was the loudest among them. He shot up from his chair, his face flushed with fury. "This is absurd," Jacob shouted. "You're just a janitor. You can't walk in here and claim to run the place." Elena turned to him slowly, her expression calm but unyielding. "I'm not just anything, Jacob," she said. "I'm the woman who now controls your job, your salary, and the future of this company." Jacob opened his mouth to argue, but Elena raised a hand to silence him. "For weeks, I've listened to you dismiss and demean the people who make this company run," Elena continued, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You call them unnecessary. You treat them as though their contributions don't matter. Well, today, you're going to learn what it feels like to be the one who doesn't matter." Jacob's defiance was replaced by a flicker of fear, but he wasn't ready to back down. "You can't fire me," Jacob said, his voice trembling. "I've been with this company for years. I know how things work." "And that's precisely why you're being let go," Elena replied coldly. "You've been here long enough to think you're untouchable. But you're not. No one is." She turned to the security guard stationed near the door, who had entered the room at her request. "Escort Mr. Pearson out of the building," Elena said firmly. The guards moved toward Jacob, who looked around the room for support. But the other executives avoided his gaze, too shocked and fearful to intervene. "This isn't over," Jacob muttered as the guards led him away. Elena didn't respond. She simply watched as the door closed behind him, her expression unreadable. With Jacob gone, the room fell silent once again. The remaining executives stared at Elena, their expressions a mix of fear and uncertainty. "Now," Elena said, her voice calm but commanding, "let's talk about the future of this company." Michael Hayes, still seated at the head of the table, cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Morales," he began cautiously, "what exactly are your intentions here? We're all a bit unclear about the direction you plan to take." Elena nodded, folding her hands on the table as she addressed the room. "My intentions are simple," she said. "This company has been in freefall for months, and the decisions you've been making are driving it further into the ground. I bought this corporation to save it, but I can't do that if the same toxic leadership remains in place." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "For too long you've treated employees as disposable," Elena continued. "You've prioritized short-term gains over long-term growth, and you've created a culture where people are afraid to speak up. That ends today." Over the next hour, Elena laid out her vision for the company. It wasn't about slashing jobs or cutting benefits. It was about investing in the people who made the company run. She spoke of innovation, collaboration, and a renewed focus on employee well-being. She emphasized the importance of treating every worker with respect, regardless of their role or title. Some of the executives nodded along, eager to align themselves with the new direction. Others remained silent, clearly unsure of how to navigate the sudden shift in leadership. Elena didn't care about their discomfort. She wasn't here to maintain the status quo. She was here to rebuild the company from the ground up. By the end of the meeting, several executives had been quietly dismissed. Elena had no patience for those who weren't willing to adapt to her vision. As the remaining executives filed out of the room, Elena stayed behind, standing at the head of the table. She glanced around the boardroom, taking in the space that had once been dominated by voices of arrogance and indifference. Now it was hers. For the first time in weeks, Elena allowed herself a small smile. The balance of power had shifted. and the company's future was no longer in the hands of those who had led it astray. This was just the beginning. The morning after the explosive boardroom meeting, the entire office buzzed with whispers and speculation. Word spread quickly about what had happened, and Elena Morales, the seemingly invisible janitor, revealed herself as the new owner of the company. The story of her dramatic takeover was already legendary among the employees, fueling a mix of fear, curiosity, and cautious optimism. Elena walked into the office with her usual calm demeanor, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of those who now looked at her differently. Gone were the dismissive glances and indifferent stares. Now people stepped aside as she walked past, their eyes filled with uncertainty. The day began with a company-wide meeting held in the same boardroom where Elena had unveiled her identity. This time, however, the room was packed, not just with executives, but with representatives from every department. Standing at the head of the table, Elena addressed the group with the confidence of someone who had earned her place. "Good morning, everyone," Elena began, her voice steady and resolute. "By now, you've probably heard about the changes that were announced yesterday. I want to take this opportunity to share my vision for the future of this company and what it means for all of us." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "This company has been through tough times," she continued. "I've spent the past few weeks observing, listening, and learning. What I've seen has confirmed what I suspected when I first bought this company. Our problems go far beyond finances. They are rooted in a culture that devalues people, prioritizes short-term profits over long-term growth, and ignores the very foundation of any successful business, its employees." The room was silent, every eye fixed on Elena. Elena didn't shy away from addressing the leadership failures that had brought the company to its current state. "Leadership is not about titles or power," she said, her voice firm. "It's about responsibility, and over the past few years, that responsibility has been neglected. Decisions have been made without consideration for the people affected by them. That ends today." She turned to the group of executives seated near the head of the table. Many of them looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as her words hit their mark. "I've made it clear that anyone who cannot align with the new direction we're taking will no longer have a place here," Elena continued. "This is not about revenge or punishment. It's about ensuring that this company has the leadership it deserves, leaders who value collaboration, innovation, and integrity." After the meeting, Elena held one-on-one sessions with several key executives. For those who had contributed to the toxic culture, it was their last day at the company. Michael Hayes, the former CEO, was among the first to go. While his tenure hadn't been marked by outright malice, his passive leadership and reluctance to address problems had allowed the company's issues to fester. "I respect your years of service," Elena said during their meeting. "But the company needs a leader who is willing to make difficult decisions and take responsibility for them. It's time for a fresh start." Michael nodded, his expression resigned. "I understand," he said quietly, shaking her hand before leaving the office for the last time. Others, like Ryan Matthews, the CFO, and Amanda Carter, the administrative assistant who had shown disdain for lower-level employees, were also dismissed. Their behavior and attitudes had made it clear that they were not aligned with the values Elena wanted to instill. "You've treated this company like a personal playground," Elena told Ryan during their meeting. "That mindset has no place in the future we're building." Ryan tried to defend himself, but Elena's decision was final. With the most toxic individuals removed from the company, Elena turned her attention to those who had demonstrated potential for genuine leadership. One of those individuals was Sarah Mitchell, a mid-level manager in the operations department. Unlike many of her peers, Sarah had consistently advocated for her team, often going out of her way to ensure that her employees felt supported. "I've seen how you treat your team," Elena told her during their meeting. "That's the kind of leadership we need. I'd like you to take on a more prominent role in helping us rebuild." Sarah was visibly surprised but grateful. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I won't let you down." While removing toxic leaders was a necessary step, Elena knew it was only the beginning. The damage caused by years of mismanagement couldn't be undone overnight. Rebuilding trust among employees would take time, and it would require concrete actions, not just words. Elena began by implementing a series of initiatives designed to show employees that they were valued. 1. Employee feedback sessions. Elena scheduled regular town hall meetings where employees could voice their concerns and offer suggestions. Unlike previous attempts at engagement, these sessions were taken seriously, with actionable items assigned to leadership teams. 2. Professional development programs. Training and development opportunities were expanded, giving employees at all levels a chance to grow and advance within the company. 3. Enhanced benefits. The company's benefits packages were revamped to include improved healthcare options, mental health resources, and more generous parental leave policies. Elena also made a point of spending time with employees at every level of the organization. She visited different departments, speaking with workers about their experiences and asking what changes they wanted to see. During one of these visits, she ran into Marisol Vega, the administrative assistant who had shown kindness during Elena's undercover days. Marisol was surprised but delighted to see Elena approaching her desk. "Miss Morales," Marisol said, standing up quickly. "Please call me Elena," she replied with a smile. "I just wanted to thank you for the hard work you do here. It doesn't go unnoticed." Marisol's face lit up. "Thank you," she said. "That means so much coming from you." Moments like these reminded Elena why she had taken on this mission. The initial reaction to Elena's changes was mixed. While many employees felt hopeful about the new direction, others were skeptical. Years of neglect and mistreatment had left them wary of promises from leadership. Elena understood their hesitation. "Trust isn't built with words," she told her leadership team during a strategy meeting. "It's built with consistent actions. We have to show them that we mean what we say." Over time, as employees began to see tangible improvements in their working conditions and opportunities for growth, the skepticism started to fade. A cautious optimism began to take root. As the first phase of her plan came to an end, Elena knew there was still much work to be done. The company's culture wouldn't change overnight, and there were bound to be challenges along the way. But for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of possibility in the air. Walking through the office late one evening, Elena paused to look out at the city skyline. The journey ahead would be long, but she was ready for it. She had already proven to herself and others that she was capable of facing adversity head-on. Now, it was time to build something lasting, something that would make all the struggles worthwhile. As the dust settled from the dramatic leadership changes, Elena Morales began focusing on the heart of her mission: rebuilding the company's culture. The toxic environment she had uncovered during her undercover weeks couldn't be ignored. It was clear that true transformation would require more than just new policies or leadership. It would demand a complete shift in how the company values its people. Her first step was to establish a clear message. Elena gathered the entire staff in the largest conference room available for an all-hands meeting. Employees filled the space, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Standing at the front of the room, Elena addressed the crowd with the same calm authority she had shown in the boardroom. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice carrying over the hushed murmurs. "Over the past few weeks, I've had the chance to see this company from a perspective many of you might not expect. I've walked your halls, cleaned your desks, and listened to your conversations, not as your CEO, but as someone trying to understand what it's like to work here." Her words immediately caught the audience's attention. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people realized the scope of her observations. "What I saw was both heartbreaking and inspiring," Elena continued. "Heartbreaking because I witnessed a culture where too many people feel undervalued, dismissed, and ignored. Inspiring because, despite these challenges, I also saw resilience, dedication, and a belief in what this company could be." Elena paused, letting her words sink in. "My goal is simple," she said. "I want this company to be a place where everyone feels respected, where your voices are heard, and where your work is valued. That begins today." Elena outlined the first phase of her plan, emphasizing transparency and accountability. 1. Creating a feedback loop. Employees at every level were encouraged to submit anonymous feedback about their experiences and suggestions for improvement. Elena made it clear that every comment would be reviewed and recurring themes would be addressed publicly. 2. Leadership training. All managers were required to undergo training on inclusive leadership, communication, and conflict resolution. Elena believed that rebuilding trust had to start at the top. 3. Employee recognition programs. Monthly awards and acknowledgement initiatives were introduced to highlight the contributions of employees across all departments, from junior staff to senior leaders. 4. Investing in employee growth. A new mentorship program was launched, pairing experienced employees with those eager to develop their skills. In addition, professional development funds were expanded, allowing employees to attend workshops, conferences, or courses of their choice. Beyond improving morale, Elena knew that structural changes were necessary. Certain departments had become bloated with redundant processes, while others were understaffed and overwhelmed. Elena worked closely with her newly appointed leadership team, including Sarah Mitchell, to identify areas of inefficiency. However, unlike the previous leadership approach, which treated employees as numbers on a spreadsheet, Elena ensured that every decision was made with empathy. No layoffs, she told her team firmly during one strategy session. We're not cutting people, we're cutting inefficiencies. Our goal is to empower the people we already have. One example of this approach was the IT department, which had struggled for years under poor management. Elena brought in a new director who prioritized collaboration and innovation. Within weeks, the team began to thrive, developing solutions that improved productivity across the company. The changes didn't happen overnight, and not everyone embraced the new direction immediately. Skepticism lingered among some employees, particularly those who had grown accustomed to the old culture of favoritism and self-interest. Tim Rogers, the intern notorious for his flippant comments, was one such individual. For weeks, he watched the transformations unfold with a mix of indifference and doubt. One afternoon, Elena crossed paths with Tim in the hallway. He greeted her with a nervous smile, clearly unsure how to interact with her now that she was no longer just the janitor. "Miss Morales," Tim said hesitantly, I just wanted to say, things are looking better around here." Elena raised an eyebrow but smiled kindly. "That's good to hear, Tim. And how about you? Are you making the most of the opportunities we're creating?" Tim nodded quickly. "Yes, definitely. I've been working on some new ideas for the marketing team." "Good," Elena said. "Remember, growth starts with your mindset. If you want to thrive here, you'll need to embrace the idea that we're all part of the same team, regardless of our titles or roles." Tim looked thoughtful as she walked away, her words clearly giving him something to consider. While skepticism lingered in some corners, other employees began to embrace the changes wholeheartedly. The introduction of the mentorship program in particular had a ripple effect throughout the company. Marisol Vega, the administrative assistant who had shown Elena kindness during her undercover days, was paired with a senior project manager who recognized her potential. Within months, Marisol transitioned into a new role as a project coordinator, a position that allowed her to showcase her organizational skills and leadership abilities. This wouldn't have happened before. Marisol told Elena during a chance meeting in the hallway, "I never felt like anyone cared about what I could do. But now, it feels like the company is finally seeing me." Her words brought a smile to Elena's face. Stories like Marisol's were exactly why she had taken on this challenge. As the weeks passed, the results of Elena's changes began to show. Productivity increased, employee satisfaction scores rose, and even the company's external reputation began to recover. Industry insiders took notice, with several publications highlighting Elena's innovative approach to leadership. One afternoon, Elena received an email from an unlikely source, Michael Hayes, the former CEO. "I'll admit, I was skeptical of your methods," Michael wrote, "but I've been following the company's progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed. You've managed to achieve what I couldn't. Well done." Elena read the message with a quiet sense of satisfaction. While she didn't need external validation to affirm her efforts, it was gratifying to see that even her critics were beginning to understand the value of her approach. Despite the progress, Elena remained focused on the future. She knew that the true measure of her success wouldn't be in quarterly reports or accolades from the press. It would be in the day-to-day experiences of the employees who made the company what it was. Late one evening, Elena walked through the office. The lights dimmed as most of the staff had already gone home. She paused outside the break room, where the familiar chipped mug she had used during her undercover weeks still sat on the counter. Picking it up, she smiled. It was a reminder of where she had started and of the work that still lay ahead. This isn't just my company, Elena thought to herself. It belongs to everyone who works here, and together we'll make it stronger than ever. With that, she set the mug back down and walked into the night, ready to continue building the foundation of a culture that valued respect, integrity, and unity. Months after Elena Morales revealed herself as the company's CEO, the atmosphere in the office had shifted dramatically. What once felt like a place dominated by fear, competition, and indifference had been replaced by collaboration, optimism, and a renewed sense of purpose. Employees who had previously kept their heads down, afraid to speak up, now felt empowered to share ideas and voice concerns. The changes Elena had implemented, leadership training, employee recognition programs, and structured feedback loops were beginning to bear fruit. But Elena knew that cultural transformation wasn't just about policies. It was about people and their stories. One of Elena's favorite initiatives was the Innovation Spotlight, a monthly program that highlighted employee ideas for improving the company. At the latest session, Marisol Vega, the former administrative assistant who had risen to a project coordinator role, stood nervously in front of a small audience, including Elena. Marisol presented her idea for a streamlined workflow system that could save hours of manual work each week. She had spent weeks perfecting the details, and her passion was evident in every word. When Marisol finished, the room erupted in applause. Elena, seated in the front row, was the first to stand. "Brilliant work, Marisol," Elena said, her voice warm and sincere. "This is exactly the kind of forward thinking we need. I can't wait to see this implemented." Marisol beamed, her confidence visibly growing in that moment. Not everyone had been enthusiastic about the changes. Early on, there were plenty of skeptics who doubted Elena's approach, including Tim Rogers, the once arrogant intern. Tim's transformation had been slow but steady. After a particularly eye-opening leadership workshop, he began to see his role and his behavior in a new light. One day, Tim approached Elena in the hallway, his demeanor markedly different from their earlier encounters. "Miss Morales," he began, hesitating for a moment before continuing. "I just wanted to thank you for giving people like me a second chance. I've learned a lot these past few months, and I realize now how much I have to grow." Elena smiled, her tone encouraging. "Growth is a process, Tim. The fact that you're willing to learn and adapt says a lot about your potential. Keep at it." Tim nodded, visibly relieved. From that day forward, he became one of the company's most vocal advocates for the new culture. Elena's emphasis on treating every employee with dignity began to ripple through the organization. Departments that had previously operated in silos started collaborating more effectively. One afternoon, Sarah Mitchell, the new operations director, approached Elena with an idea for cross-departmental mentorship. "I think we can bridge some of the gaps between teams by pairing employees from different departments," Sarah explained. "It would give people a better understanding of how their work impacts the bigger picture." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "I love it, Sarah. Let's make it happen." Within weeks, the mentorship program was up and running, fostering relationships between teams that had rarely interacted before. Employees reported feeling more connected to the company's mission, and productivity soared as a result. The changes within the company didn't go unnoticed by the outside world. Industry publications began to feature articles about the company's transformation, highlighting Elena's unique leadership approach. One headline read, "From the ground up, how a CEO rebuilt a company by embracing empathy." Elena often downplayed the accolades, but she understood their significance. Positive press not only bolstered the company's reputation, but also attracted top talent who were eager to work in an environment that valued integrity and innovation. One day, Elena received an unexpected visitor, Michael Hayes, the former CEO. I hope I'm not intruding, Michael said as he stepped into her office, his tone respectful. Not at all, Elena replied, motioning for him to sit. What brings you by? Michael hesitated before speaking. I've been following the company's progress, and I have to admit, you've accomplished something remarkable. I didn't think this kind of turnaround was possible. Elena smiled. It wasn't easy, but it's amazing what happens when you focus on people instead of just numbers. Michael nodded thoughtfully. I wish I had understood that earlier. If you ever need advice or even just a sounding board, I'd be happy to help in any way I can. Thank you, Michael, Elena said. I appreciate that. The conversation ended on a positive note, a reminder of how far the company and its former leaders had come. As the months turned into a year, the company continued to thrive. Employees at all levels began to see themselves as part of a larger community, united by shared values and a common purpose. One day, while walking through the office, Elena noticed a group of janitors chatting with members of the marketing team near the break room. The sight brought a smile to her face. It was a small but powerful symbol of the inclusivity she had worked so hard to foster. Excuse me, Miss Morales, one of the janitors, a young man named Luis, called out as she passed. Elena stopped and turned toward him. Yes, Luis? I just wanted to say thank you, Luis said. It feels different around here now, like we actually matter. You do matter, Elena replied, her voice full of conviction, and I'm glad you feel that way. That evening, as Elena sat in her office overlooking the city skyline, she reflected on the journey so far. The company's transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every challenge and sacrifice. Her desk was covered with reports, proposals, and plans for the future, but one item stood out, a handwritten thank you note from an employee. The note read, Dear Miss Morales, thank you for believing in us when no one else did. You've shown us what true leadership looks like, and we're proud to be part of this company. Sincerely, Marisol Vega. Elena smiled as she placed the note back on her desk. The work was far from over, but she was no longer carrying the weight alone. Together, they were building a company that would stand as a testament to the power of respect, empathy, and shared purpose. A year had passed since Elena Morales took over as CEO and revealed her identity to a stunned boardroom. The transformation of the company was nothing short of extraordinary. The business was no longer teetering on the edge of collapse. Instead, it was thriving, with soaring employee satisfaction scores, growing revenue, and a reputation as a leader in innovation and workplace culture. As Elena walked through the office one morning, she couldn't help but notice the lively atmosphere. Employees chatted warmly in the hallways, collaborative meetings were held in open spaces, and smiles seemed to be a permanent fixture on people's faces. For Elena, the real triumph wasn't just in the company's recovery. It was in the spirit of the people who worked there. Bookmark. One of Elena's proudest achievements was the diversity and inclusivity that now defined the company. Employees from all backgrounds felt welcomed and empowered to contribute. In one corner of the office, Luis, the janitor who had once thanked Elena for creating a sense of belonging, was sharing lunch with members of the design team. Nearby, Marisol Vega was leading a brainstorming session with her project team, her confidence shining through as she guided the discussion. These moments, once unimaginable in the company's previous culture, had become everyday occurrences. The positive changes within the company had begun to influence the larger industry. Competitors and partners took notice of the company's remarkable turnaround and sought to learn from its example. At a recent industry conference, Elena was invited to give a keynote speech. The room was packed with executives eager to hear her insights. Elena stepped onto the stage, her presence commanding yet approachable. When I took over this company, she began, it was broken, not because of its finances, but because of its culture. People were treated as expendable. Decisions were made without considering their human cost. I realized that if we wanted to save the business, we first had to save its people. Her speech was met with a standing ovation. As she left the stage, several attendees approached her, expressing their admiration and asking how they could implement similar changes in their own organizations. Elena's message was clear. The success of a company depended on the well-being and respect of its workforce. One evening, Long after most employees had left for the day, Elena found herself alone in the office. She walked the now familiar halls, reflecting on how far the company and she had come. Pausing outside the CEO's office, she stared at the brass nameplate that now bore her name. It was a stark contrast to the chipped mop and bucket she had pushed during her undercover weeks. Elena thought about the countless moments that had tested her patience and resolve, the dismissive comments, the underestimation, the uphill battle to earn trust. But those experiences had also given her the clarity and strength to lead. She entered her office and sat at her desk, her gaze drifting to a photo on the wall. It was a snapshot of her team at a recent company event, their smiles radiating pride and camaraderie. This is what leadership is about, Elena thought. Not power or titles, but the impact you have on the people around you. The company's one-year anniversary under Elena's leadership was marked with a celebratory event. Employees from all departments gathered in the atrium, which had been transformed into a vibrant party space. Elena stood at the podium, addressing the crowd with a smile. "Today, we celebrate more than just a successful year," she began. "We celebrate the resilience, dedication, and spirit of every person here. You are the reason we've come this far, and you are the foundation of everything we will achieve in the future." The room erupted into applause, and Elena felt a swell of pride. This wasn't just her accomplishment, it was theirs. Under Elena's guidance, the company became a model for ethical leadership and sustainable growth. Employees were no longer afraid to speak up, knowing their voices mattered. Innovation flourished as people worked together with mutual respect and trust. Elena often thought about the day she first walked into the building as a janitor. At the time, the task ahead had seemed insurmountable, but she had learned that true leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about listening, adapting, and leading by example. As the company continued to thrive, Elena began planning for the years ahead. She knew that sustaining the culture they had built would require constant effort and vigilance. In her office, she drafted a new mission statement, one that encapsulated the values she had worked so hard to instill. "Our company is built on respect, integrity, and collaboration. We believe in the power of people and the strength of a shared vision. Together, we will create a future where success is measured not just in profits, but in the lives we touch." Elena knew the work would never truly be finished. But that was the beauty of leadership. It was a journey, not a destination. Years later, as Elena prepared to step down from her role as CEO, she reflected on the legacy she would leave behind. The company had become more than just a business. It was a community, a family. Her decision to take on the role of a janitor, to see the company from the ground up, had been unconventional, but it had been the key to everything. Elena's final act as CEO was to establish a scholarship fund for employees' families, ensuring that future generations would have access to opportunities they might not otherwise have. As she handed over the reins to her successor, Elena felt a profound sense of peace. She had done what she set out to do: transform not just a company, but the lives of the people within it. On her last day, Elena took one final walk through the office. She stopped by the break room, where the familiar chipped mug she had used during her undercover days now sat on a shelf, preserved as a small but meaningful piece of the company's history. Picking up the mug, Elena smiled. It was a reminder of where she had started and how far they had come. As she left the building, the sun setting behind her, Elena felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had proven that leadership could be compassionate and that businesses could thrive without sacrificing humanity. The company would continue to grow, but its foundation, the values she had instilled, would remain strong. And with that, Elena walked into the next chapter of her life, knowing she had made a lasting difference. The story of Elena Morales is a powerful reminder of what true leadership entails. Through her unconventional approach, disguising herself as a janitor to uncover the truth, Elena demonstrated that leadership isn't about titles or power, but about understanding, empathy, and the courage to confront systemic issues. Her journey sheds light on the importance of valuing people, regardless of their position, and fostering a culture of respect and collaboration. By prioritizing long-term growth over short-term fixes, she not only saved a company on the brink of collapse, but also transformed it into a thriving, inclusive community. The lessons are clear. A successful organization isn't built solely on numbers or strategies, but on the strength of its people. When leaders listen, empower, and treat everyone with dignity, they unlock the potential for incredible change. Elena's story inspires us to look beyond appearances, challenge outdated norms, and lead with humanity at the core. If this story resonates with you, let us know in the comments. Type 1 if you found it inspiring, or 2 if you thought it was truly exceptional, and we'd love to hear your personal experiences. Have you ever faced challenges that required resilience and empathy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to stay connected with more inspiring stories like this one. Let's keep the conversation going and spread the message of hope and leadership. Thank you for being part of our community. Your voice matters here.